Hoping for a more reliable locomotive during the harsh Canadian winters, Canadian National looked for a full cowl unit and helped develop the famous Draper Taper. The Taper lasted for several locomotives, including the SD60F, the Canadian version of EMD's successful SD60. CN would order 60 units delivered in late 1980s and lasted a good service life before storage and eventually retirement in 2017. Several were sold to short lines and live out second-hand lives on these railroads. Aurora Miniatures announced their first American model in October of 2020, and after a long road, finally delivered the models in the first week of 2023. Their inaugural run of the SD60F included 4 paint schemes for CN, a total of 12 road numbers for this release. The MSRP on the DCC and Sound models is a penny short of $300. The model that we will be taking a look at today is CN 5555. This unit is a CN Stripes model with the in-service details. The Crazy 5 locomotive was built in October of 1989 and last photographed in 2019 at the Northern Plains Railroad on the chopping block. Checking out the details on the front, one of the unique aspects of the SD60F is the brow-mounted bell on the front with the printed locomotive numbers on either side. Finishing out the brow is the addition of the separately applied metal grab irons. The 4 front windows are fitted with metal windshield wipers painted in the silver color. The top of the nose is painted black to help reduce glare for the crews, fitted with 2 different styles of separately applied grab irons, as well as the sand dome access hatches. Down on the front of the nose is the vast array of lighting features. The dominating one is the LED headlight in the middle of the nose in the golden white color. Off to the sides are the 3 small colored lenses that house the class lights. These lighting features cycle between red, green, and white color. Just below the class lights are the LED number boards with the Crazy 5 numbers. The front of the nose is finished off with more separately applied metal grab iron ladders on the engineer's side. Continuing down the front of the locomotive, the front handrail stanchions are mounted just above the anti-climber, molded in a black plastic with a white accent painting. The LED ditch lights are also mounted to the front sill. These larger style ditch lights are slightly different from the conductor's side, having the MU receptacle integrated to the ditch light support. For the details below the anti-climber, which sports the yellow safety striping, one of the more difficult to see details is the separately applied plastic cut bar matching the black car body paint. The 2 sets of locomotive air brake hoses are on either side of the draft gearbox with the glad hands painted in the silver metallic color. The snowplow dominates the front view with the white striping and metal grab irons applied to the top of the plow. At the center of the plow is the Aurora brand plastic scale coupler. This is a neat coupler as the usual visible coupler spring is absent from the view for a more realistic look. Just to the side of the coupler is the main trainline air hose, matching the other air hoses molded in black plastic and then having the silver accent glad hand painting. Down the side of the cab, we get a good profile shot of this Canadian safety cab, with starting out at the top are the etched metal sun shades, and these are the angled versions. The windows are completed with the side mirrors, rivet details, and silver painted side frames. Immediately behind the window is the cab access door, with the associated grab irons on either side. These separately applied plastic details are painted in the white color. The steps leading up to the doors are very nice. The floor plates for the top 2 steps are etched metal, and the hanging black piece has the etched metal back plates. The ladder platform also has the yellow safety striping, a paint scheme specific detail for the in-service units. The locomotive rides on the classic EMD HTC trucks cast by DeFasco. These trucks have great molded on detail as well as separately applied detail. Some of these nicer separately applied details are the brake cylinders and associated brake plumbing. One of the more proudly boasted features from Aurora on these models are their use of the rotating roller bearing caps, and these can be seen on the first and third axles of this front truck. The model does come with a spare parts baggie with extra roller bearing caps. Finally, rolling out the conductor side of the cab are the sanding lines after that third axle. What's really nice about these ones is that the ends of the line have a pointed edge, similar to what's found on the prototype. Moving down to the long hood, the majority of the details to point out is relatively scarce with the use of that full cowl body. The majority of the details are hidden behind the access panels on the prototype. We can see the dynamic brake blower intake, and this is another separately applied metal piece with a good look to the interior as well as through the entire locomotive. The air intake behind the Dynamic is the central air filter and intake grill. This allows the engine to draw the outside air in for combustion. Along with the taper from the car body, the separately applied electrical cabinet breaks up the smooth taper. This electrical cabinet is painted black and white to match the CN stripes, as well as having the metal lift ring details on the top. Towards the bottom of the locomotive is the 4,400-gallon fuel tank, and it's quite a bit more plain than the standard EMD fuel tanks, with a few of the details on the front of the tank. Two of these details are the breather pipes that run oblique, dumping fuel in the middle of the track, and the other is the fuel level sight glass with a red-handled valve modeled on the lower portion of the sight glass. The fuel level sight glass is a detail on both sides of the model, contrary to the breather pipe. So looking back up to the long hood, the last detail to really point out is the radiator intake grills with the super fine mesh detail. Moving towards the rear of the locomotive, the majority of the details are similar to other standard GMD locomotives. Starting off with the top is the LED rear light just below the printed locomotive number. The conductor side of the rear face has the wire grab iron ladder leading up to access to the top of the locomotive, with the center having the rear access door and window insert. This is probably one of the best looking rear doors I've seen in a while. The separation in the body lines almost makes it look like a separately applied detail, but it's still molded into the car body. The handrails are mounted to the end sill, and similar to the front handrails, are molded in the black plastic with the white accent painting near the crew access stairs. The MU receptacle is mounted on the anti-climber with the plastic coupler cut bar just below. The rear face of the lower sill has some nice details as well. Some of the details that were not mentioned on the front include the separately applied metal grab irons to hold back the locomotive air brakes, as well as the spare knuckles mounted to the same face plate. The rear of the locomotive is finished off with the same Aurora brand scale plastic couplers, molded in a dark brown finish. The engineer's side is very similar to the conductor's, with only a few extra minor details. One of the aspects that we skipped over on the conductor side is the window insert for the access door on the midsection of the locomotive. Just below the sill is the use of the real scale brass chain. On the prototype, this is used for the handbrake that would be accessed inside the cowl body. One of the details that aren't usually seen on other standard EMDs, such as the SD40-2, is the addition of the oil waste tank. This tank is attached to the rear side of the fuel tank, and the purpose is the retention of all the waste oil given off by the prime mover and the prime mover subassemblies. This locomotive is fitted with two air receiver tanks, with one on each side of the locomotive. Both of these are fitted just above the fuel tank and have smaller molded on plumbing. There's a few more of the fuel tank details on the engineer side as well. The first of these is the fuel filler port that's marked with the red accent paint, as well as the emergency fuel cutoff switch that is mounted into the side sill, breaking up the yellow safety stripe. Just in front of the fuel tank is more of the air plumbing details. One of the separately applied detail components is the Salem air filter just in front of the fuel tank and is the accordion style. Model also features several lighting features. Two of these include the ground lights as well as the step lights. Both of these are a little bit hard to see with the ground lights tucked up under the sill, whereas the step lights actually give off the light via the detailed housing on the crew access steps by the front and rear handrails. Up on the roof of the locomotive are some pretty good details as well. Starting off near the front of the roof is a smaller antenna near the bell, as well as a larger one near the rear of the cab. The next detail to come around is the dynamic brake fan details, as it is an extra metal piece that is painted silver over an etched metal grille. The prime mover exhaust is the slotted opening on the silver hatch on the center of the locomotive and has the Nathan P3 horn attached to the angled section just off to the right of the exhaust hatch. The entirety of the roof is littered with the etched metal lift ring details for all the various components that may need to be lifted off the locomotive body. Finally, moving down towards the radiator section, you can see the three radiator fans with the internal fan blades and etched metal grills on the top. That first radiator fan does have the winterization hatch over it, and it does have a nice mesh screen above the fan. These fans do operate, which is one of the flagship details from Aurora, and we will be taking a look at that later in the operations section. Flipping the model over, some of the details that can be seen a little bit easier from underneath are the see-through etched metal side steps. These side steps are very nicely done and have the safety striping applied to the back plates of the step, another in-service paint scheme specific detail. Another redesign from the Aurora brand, contrary to other manufacturers, is the new design of the drivetrain, which is a shaft system instead of a series of gears, and allows a more detailed look of the traction motor details and gives a prototypical look when viewing the truck side frames from the side. The shell of the model can be removed by removing the coupler box screws, as well as removing the dynamic brake housing and detaching a small ribbon cable. Once these two are completed, the shell can be wiggled off. There is an extensive array of details, and the shell was very snugly fit onto the chassis and was difficult to remove and very difficult putting the shell back on. I would definitely not recommend taking the shell off unless absolutely necessary. The interior of the model is filled with the 5-pole skew-wound motor and dual brass flywheels. All of the wheels pick up power as well as provide tractive force to the rails. The electronics portion of the mechanism has a larger lighting board and auxiliary system board. It also has the 21-pin socket for the ESU V5 decoder. The model does come with 2 Sugar Cube speakers. Both of them are under the light blue circuit board, one near the front and one near the rear. The lighting board does also feature several supercapacitors for constant running over dirty track. But enough talking, let's go ahead and fire this up on the layout, going through the start sequence and some of the major decoder functions. The weight of the locomotive is 21.54 ounces or 610 grams. And for comparison, the Athearn Genesis SD60M, the closest SD60 variant I had, weighed in at 22.2 ounces. But the Aurora SD60F should be able to pull about 45 standard freight cars. And when comparing the coupler heights to the Katy height gauge, it was found that both ends were slightly low. For the scoring section of the review, the score will be broken down into several categories, each with its own point totaling, adding up to 100 possible points. The packaging of the model is becoming more standard to other manufacturers, with the locomotive screwed down to a plastic carrier that needs to be unscrewed to remove the locomotive. It did arrive damage-free and in good condition, as well as included with a manual. The model seems fairly accurate overall. The only timeline issues I noticed is that the engineer side of the sunshades has a longer rectangular version for a while, but it's not really that big of an issue as it did get changed out fairly often throughout the lifetime of the 5555, and it did have the angled version at the end of its service life. And from my research, it seemed that this was a unit-specific issue and not a model-specific issue. Overall, the paint on the model is fairly well done, with all the printing and decal work looking good. One small issue I did notice on the paint was the CN tiger striping didn't lay perfectly flat for the entire stripe, as well as there was some fuzziness and quite a bit of bleed through on the stripes. The details on the model are fairly well done and rank up there with some of the heavy hitters of the industry. Overall, there's not really anything I could think of that could be added to this locomotive or anything that I thought should have been a separately applied detail, and everything looked good and pretty up to par. When comparing this to the prototype photos, I can't really find anything on ways to improve this model, and overall just a very nicely detailed model. The weight of the chassis as well as the 5-pole motor gives some great pulling power on this model, and the dual Sugar Cube speaker is nicely done with the ESU V5 decoder. I really like that these Sugar Cube speakers have two different placements, so it doesn't really sound like all of the sound is coming out of the rear locomotive or the front or vice versa. Power packs also perform well in the model, and the locomotive can run for approximately 10 seconds with a loss of power. The lights also perform well. The headlight, rear light, and class lights all work well, but there is quite a bit of bleed through on the class lights, especially on the green, and the step and ground lights are pretty dim, but this might be able to be fixed with some CV changes. One area I was actually slightly disappointed on was the spinning fan detail. Now they look awesome, but they are very loud, and really if you don't have the sound on, I wouldn't be running them just because they are quite a bit louder than the actual locomotive drivetrain itself. And even when you do have the sound on, you can kind of hear the radiator fan spinning in the background with that electrical whirling sound. All in all, it's pretty cool, but just thought it could have been better with the actual radiator fan motor being very loud. The trucks have great detail, including all the molded on and separately applied details. They also have the rotating roller bearing caps with the metal wheels that all provide power and pick up electricity. The couplers are the Aurora brand scale plastic couplers. That being said, on a $300 model, plastic couplers are not something I'm looking forward to, as well as the fact that both couplers ended up being low. Value is always something that's pretty subjective, but I felt pretty good about spending the money on this locomotive. There's always quite a bit of risk when purchasing a new locomotive, whether it's new from a manufacturer or even a new chassis, where the manufacturer might have some flaws that still need to be worked out, especially on a mass-produced model scale. And I think this is one of the few times where it's been quite worth the price point, especially with all the details and features that you really get. This is also pretty comparable to some of the best detailed models on the market. And finally, for the miscellaneous section, it's a very nice performing locomotive that looks good and has all the bells and whistles you could ever want on a brand new piece of equipment. I am going to take away 1 point just for all the collective little issues that the whole locomotive have. It wasn't anything major, but there were still just a few issues across the whole board. Adding up all the scores gives a 91 out of 100 or an A- rating. This puts Aurora's first locomotive 8th on the list and very respectable score for this model. Overall, the score for the SD60F is very fitting. The model is very nicely detailed, but does have a few minor issues across the board, but overall a great showing for Aurora's first locomotive. Especially when introducing new models to the market often have several flaws and issues across the board, and I think this is a great preview on what Aurora can bring to the rest of the market on their future endeavors. This model is definitely worthy of the price tag, and I would recommend this locomotive to any semi-modern CN modeler. The brand new rotating radiator fans is definitely an eye-catching feature, and I think once there are some fine-tuned adjustments to the overall performance of the mechanism, that this will be a great feature that all manufacturers should look at implementing into their models. That being said, I think it's just a little bit premature. It looks cool, but I definitely wouldn't have it on while running just because of the noise it makes, and I definitely would want to have the sound on the prime mover turned up quite a bit to drown out the actual winding of the mechanism. But other than that, the model performed and looked great, and definitely in the class of Genesis and scale trains for your 6-axle road diesels. But that's all I got for you guys right now. Let me know what you guys think about this model. It's already been making quite a few waves in the community, with a lot of modelers been waiting for this project, even if it's a little bit obscure and not in everyone's era. But this project does give me a lot of excitement for Aurora's other projects. I believe they have the 50-foot Gunderson High Cubes in production that should be arriving soon, and they just announced the 66-foot Railgun Gondola. But that's all I got for you guys this time. I'll leave you with one more run-by shot of this SD60F. Comment, rate, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.